Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mike Phillips, Chairman of the Cobb County Ethics Board, and as usual, what we will do, we will in turn open our meeting this evening, which is open to the public until 5:10. We would ask each member of the board if they would please recite and repeat your name and what organization they represent when they started. All right.
My name is Angeline Mathis, and I am serving on the board to fill the vacancy of the board member who has refused to stop.
Good evening, I'm Errol Sutton, I represent the Cobb County Bar Association.
Good evening, my name is Deborah King. I represent the homeowners districts of Districts 1 and District 4.
And I'm Mike Patelis, the chairman of the board, and I represent also the Civil Service Board of Cobb County.
My name is Doug Shaddix, I'm appointed to the board by the Cobb County Board of Elections.
Walter Moon, Cobb County Board of Commissioners.
I'm Richard Zielber, and I represent homeowners districts 1 and, 2 and 3.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would ask council if he would in turn give the oath of office to Ms. King and Ms. Mathis, please, at this time.
If you would please stand and raise your right hand. You do not have to repeat the oath. I would ask at the end of the oath, if you agree, say I do. Do you swear or affirm that you will faithfully administer and fulfill your duties as a member of as a board member as provided in the Cobb County Code of Ethics and as is in the best interest of Cobb County, Georgia?
I do.
Thank you. I would also at this time entertain a motion from a member of the board concerning the minutes of April 8th meeting.
Move that we approve those minutes.
Motion to make approved, second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So be it. The minutes of April 9th meeting approved. As far as old business, we have none. Our new business is we in turn ask council at this time to make any comments he has.
Well, according to the agenda, the appropriate thing to do at this time is to introduce the pleadings to the board members. On March the 7th of this year, 2014, Larry Savage filed with the Cobb County Board of Ethics a complaint against Commissioners Tim Lee, Chairman of the Board of Commissioners, Ellen Gorham, Bob Ott, and Joanne Burrell. Mr. Savage alleged 2 acts constituting violations of the Ethics Code. Specifically, Mr. Savage alleged the Commissioners each violated the Code of Ethics by 1. Voting for the Memorandum of Understanding with the Atlanta Braves regarding plans to build a new stadium in Cobb County, and 2, voting for the creation of special districts and associated taxes. On April the 7th of this year, the Commissioners filed a response to the complaint denying any ethics violations. Mr. Savage filed a rebuttal dated April the 16th of 2014. He also filed on April the 17th of 2014 a document labeled Ethics Complaint Number 2 that he requested be considered as an addendum to his original complaint or as a new complaint. Complaint Number 2 alleged there are 2 versions of the Memorandum of Understanding, and that having 2 versions conceals facts of public interest and deceives the public. Mr. Savage also added Commissioner Lisa Cupid as a named party against whom complaint number 2 is made. However, no specific violation of the law or code of ethics was made as to that second complaint. Those pleadings and supporting citations, materials, and documents submitted by parties have been made available to all of the members of the board, and you should have that before you this evening. Those are for your consideration. According to the applicable rules, the matter has been set for an investigatory hearing today. This type of hearing is a preliminary proceeding at which there is no testimony or participation by any of the parties. I will now address the legal considerations the board has before it. Maintaining public trust in the integrity of government is essential to the success of a democratic republic. The primary function of a code of ethics is to aid in establishing that necessary public trust. By providing guidance to those members of government who are subject to the code, the Cobb County Chairman and the Board of Commissioners are subject to the code of ethics. However, it is the Board of Ethics that has the responsibility for receiving and hearing complaints of violations. Those violations that may transcend the standards established by the Code of Ethics. It's not the arena where political battles are to be fought, nor is it a court of law. It matters not who brings the complaints before the board. And the initial concern at this investigatory stage is whether there is enough evidence to warrant further proceedings on the complaint or complaints as they have been filed. The meeting presently in session is for that purpose. Today, the concern is a citizen's complaint that certain members of the Cobb County Board of Commissioners have violated the Code of Ethics by these following acts that I have previously referred to, by voting for the Memorandum of Understanding with the Atlanta Braves regarding plans to build a new stadium in Cobb County for the use by the Braves, a team in Major League Baseball, and 2, voting for the creation of special districts and associated new taxes and fees for hotel fees and ad valorem taxes. In considering these matters, the members of the board are constrained by the rules of the Code of Ethics. Those rules provide 2 basic types of conduct that are prohibited by the Code. First, the officers that are subject to the alleged violations, in this case, the Board of Commissioners and its chairman, must act in an impartial manner and not use their public position to obtain a private gain or to give preferential treatment to any person. In the matter presently before the board, there is no allegation of any such conduct on the part of any commissioner, and no such conduct can be inferred by the board. The second prohibition is that no officer shall engage in any transaction that is prohibited by law. The complaints now before the board allege the voting complained of does violate the law and therefore is an ethical violation. In support of the complaint, it is argued that the Constitution of Georgia and certain Georgia statutory laws prohibit the method used by the Board of Commissioners for the terms of the Memorandum of Understanding with the Atlanta Braves. The issue for decision by the board at this investigatory stage meeting is not whether such voting is actually prohibited by law or whether there has been a violation of the ethics code. But your consideration is whether the conduct complained of violates clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. It is not for the Board of Ethics to interpret constitutional or statutory law on a case of first impression. That responsibility belongs to courts of law. In order for the complaining party to move past the investigatory stage of an ethics inquiry under the circumstances of the present complaints, it must be shown that a materially similar case has already been decided, giving notice to the commissioners that the act or acts of which they are alleged to have done were illegal at the time or before the time of their acts, that is, before voting on the memorandum of understanding. Or that the laws cited are so clearly applicable that no interpretation or similar case is needed. Council is unaware of any similar case that has been decided by any court of this state. So that leaves the members of the board with the duty to examine the complaint in light of the constitutional and statutory provisions cited in support of the complaint, to determine if those provisions are so clear that no interpretation is necessary for an ordinary person to have understood the act of voting for the memorandum of understanding was a violation of those laws. If the board finds that such is the case, that the provisions are so clear that no interpretation is necessary, the appropriate action would be to entertain the motion set out in the agenda schedule as motion A, which reads, specific substantiated evidence from a credible source or sources exists to support a reasonable conclusion that Commissioners Lee, Ott, Gorham, and Burrell have violated the Cobb County Codes of Ethics, so that a formal public hearing shall be set by the chairman. All parties shall be afforded an opportunity to be heard to determine whether clear and convincing evidence shows the code has been violated. If the board finds that those constitutional and statutory provisions cited in support of the complaint do require interpretation when applied to the acts of the commissioners, then it would be appropriate to dismiss the complaints and leave the matter of interpretation to a court of law, and you would entertain the motion set out as motion B in the agenda minutes, which reads, no specific substantiated evidence from a credible source or sources exist to support a reasonable belief that Commissioners Lee, Gorham, Ott, and or Burrell have violated the Cobb County Code of Ethics, and accordingly, Mr. Savage's complaint is dismissed. In that case, the second case, the ethical proceedings would be concluded, and any further consideration of the legality of the acts of the commissioners would properly be left to another forum. It is now appropriate for the members of the board to consider these matters and determine what action should be taken. And I leave it with the board.
Thank you, Councilman. At this time, I would ask the board, I'm going to ask each member of the board, starting with Mrs. Mathis on my right here, to openly discuss their comments as far as the vote is concerned. And at the conclusion of your particular comments, I would ask that a comment be made as to you are in favor of, or you vote accordingly to motion A or motion B on this. After everyone has made their comments, we will in turn call for a motion. We will vote on that motion, and based on the results of the motion, we will move forward one way or the other. Any questions on that? And I will in turn save my comments to last. Ms. Mathis.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that I'm trying to review some of the additional documents we have. I'm not really prepared to say how I vote right now as the member who has been put on here so that we would have a full board for purposes of this hearing. I think I'd feel more comfortable if we began the discussion with another board member.
Okay, that's fine. We'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My comments are brief. Ours is a very limited view. The scope of it is limited, as Council said, to the confines of the Code of Ethics. If that is the case, I see nothing on the face of Mr. Savage's complaint that would give me any reasonable belief that any violation of the Code of Ethics has occurred. I would therefore vote to dismiss the complaint. Mr. Savage may certainly have recourse elsewhere, but it is not here with this board.
Thank you. Ms. King?
In reviewing the information presented to me, and understanding the ramifications of what a code of ethics is, and furthermore, the ramifications that it has for us as board members. Unfortunately, I didn't see anything that stated that the commissioners indeed unduly presented information and moved forward in an unethical way. And so I too vote to dismiss.
My thoughts are that alleged violations of oath of office are unfounded where commissioners deliberated and exercised independent judgment in their capacities as elected public officials. Cobb County is a corporate and a political body with the power to enter into agreements and contracts within the scope of its authority. And unless the commissioners knew that there was an adequate legal foundation for their proceeding and proceeded in light of that knowledge, they were not guilty of ethical violations by virtue of having exercised powers conferred upon them by the law. I believe it would be inappropriate for the Board of Ethics to act unless the conduct complained of violates clearly established statutory or constitutional principles of which a reasonable person would have known. That responsibility rightly belongs to the court of law. Now, while I may or may not agree with the actions of the Cobb County Board of Commissioners, while also I may or may not share all the concerns of Mr. Savage, determination of that is not vested in the Cobb County Board of Ethics, but again in the court of law. The ethics complaint alleges that commitments in the memorandum of understanding undertake bond debt without the assent of voters. Commitment for the memorandum of understanding to assess taxes for the purpose of paying interest for sports stadium. Other matters as it relates to Article 9, Section 6 of the Georgia Constitution regarding revenue bonds, actions to levy new taxes such as hotel and rolling taxes, etc., and questions regarding special districts and how many under the Georgia Constitution. These are all points of law and not of ethics. Therefore, my position is that it's not. We're not vested with the authority to pass judgment on these matters.
All right. Reverend Booth?
Yes. I don't know if I have a clear enough identification in terms of the Constitution or what is actually against the law. And until I've had a chance to really look at that, I don't know if I'm prepared to say yea or nay until it's clear in my mind that there has in fact been a violation of the law or the Constitution.
Let's keep in mind, keep in mind that if it was a violation of the law, that would not come under our jurisdiction. We're in turn looking strictly at the ethical action of the board. So keeping that in mind, I think I support what you're saying, but we're not here to make a judgment as far as the law is concerned. That would be from a court of law, which we are not. So that being said, sir, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I want to make sure we understand that we are not a court of law. And you can abstain from voting whatever. I think I support what you're saying. Thank you.
I tend to agree with what everyone has said. In reading all of the material that was provided to us, obviously Ms. Dance of the Cobb County Legal Department did a lot of research into what was quote-unquote legal and presented that to the commissioners. And they were voting on what they were given as legal documents. So if the legal documents are incorrect, again, that is not in our venue. That is in a court of law, and it has to be looked at someplace else. And again, I just feel it should be dismissed.
All right, thank you. All right, my comments are, at this point, I see no violation of, no ethical violation of any member of the commission. And echoing what you said, if they voted because they got some wrong legal guidance, that's not our option to say right or wrong, because that in turn would be for a court of law. We are not a court of law, and I do not see where any of the commissioners violated any code of ethics, nor do I see where they would in turn make a vote where it may enhance their political stature or financial stature in time. So I don't see anywhere where their conduct violated ethical thing. And after review of the complaints, I would concur, my personal opinion is that there is no substantial evidence from a credible source, and I would in turn, my vote would be to dismiss it. So that being said, if anyone might have to add additional comment add to your own comments.
I'll say this time, Mr. Chairman, that I appreciated Mr. Grayson's delineating for us the standards that we have to look at in the ethics code, and that there does not seem to have been brought before us the standard that would be required that would show that there was knowledge of any statute violation or even any legal advice that they received to the contrary. And as a matter of fact, the county seems to have documented very well the legal advice that they did receive in carrying forward with this memorandum of understanding. And so for that reason, I would also vote to dismiss.
Any other comments? Yes, sir,
I
Doctor.
do have another question. With reference to voting for the creation of special districts and associated taxes. I could not determine if in fact that the commissioners had been made totally aware that that was a violation.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm asking is, can we determine if in fact that the commission, before they voted, that they were made aware or they were cognizant of the state already having issued with reference to voting to create special districts?
Councilman?
You have to consider the evidence that has been presented to you at this point, and at this point, there is no such evidence.
I can understand what Dr. Moon was feeling. We have to go under an assumption that the recommendations that the Board of Commissioners received and the legal advice they received concerning these matters before they entered into them was correct and truthful. And I would assume that our commissioners made their decision based on the advice of their counselors and all the councils that were involved with this. If they got bad data, that would not be our judgment to say they got bad data. We can only assume that they in turn cast their ballot, made their decisions based on information provided to them by their staff and by the councils of all parties concerned. So I don't know if that answers your question. I understand where you're coming from, but that's something that at this point we don't have. And if we had it, we couldn't say this is right or this is wrong, because that was information provided to them, legal information, which would take the court of law to decipher if an error had been made. We're looking at solely the fact that did the individuals, in your opinion, based on the documentation that you have, did they unethically make a decision? That's what I'm saying. And vote your conscience. And that being said, I would in turn call for a motion from any of the board members, either a motion to dismiss or a motion to continue. So at this point, I need a motion from someone.
I make a motion to dismiss.
Motion has been made to be dismissed. Is there any discussion on that motion to dismiss? If that's the case, I'll call for a vote by show of hands. All in favor of a motion to do...
Mr. Chairman, I think we need a second.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely correct. Thanks a lot. Can we have a second, please?
I second the motion.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, before you vote, I think it would be appropriate for the record if you read the specific motion that is being voted upon.
Going to. Motion has been made and seconded that no specific substantiated evidence from a credible source or sources exists to support a reasonable belief that Commissioner Lee, Gorham, Ott, Burrell, have violated the Cobb County Code of Ethics, and accordingly, Mr. Savage's complaint is dismissed. That is the motion that's before the board. It's been made and seconded, and at this time I call for a vote from the board. Show of hands of all those approve of the motion made. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and opposed. 6 and 1. In that case, I would say that the case is settled, that the Board of Ethics will dismiss this case based on the recommendations and of the board. Is any other further business any board member has? In this case, could I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
First, second? Second? I do declare this meeting adjourned.
You good there, Ray? Yep. Okay. So Larry, your response? You say no. Sir, thank you. Appreciate it.
Just see the first punt in Major League Baseball. They just basically skip through their responsibilities. If you have to go to court and prove it in court, then what would you go to an ethics board afterwards for? You know, the standard is absolutely, in fact, the standard is all new to me. I hadn't heard any of this about what it's way back. I've looked at the code, everything I can find. The only time anybody connected with this process has contacted me was in response after I contacted them. I have been given no information, no advice, no suggestions, and basically left to do whatever I could figure out to do. And now I see why. The whole objective, there's no point to having an ethics board if they can't make decisions about ethics. I didn't ask for a legal decision. I know this is not a court of law, but ethics is ethics. Ethics is a higher standard than the law. There are a lot of things that happen that are really illegal that are sure as heck not ethical. We see that all the time.
Obvious dumb question, bad vote?
Well, I mean, they voted what they thought was right, but I think the advice they're given is wrong. I think, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's wrong, right according to whatever the rules of the game are. I didn't know the rules of the game, and maybe that's my fault, but I thought I had done everything reasonably to find out what the rules were. You know, the whole objective tonight was to decide whether a hearing was appropriate. The answers to the questions that people were talking about would be found in a hearing. If you decide you're not going to have a hearing, everybody goes home with the questions unanswered. I do not understand why they wouldn't lean toward having a hearing instead of away from it.
What's your next step at this point?
I'm going to go to dinner.